The cool air of Shenandoah National Park wrapped around me as I stepped out of my tent, the morning dew clinging to the canvas and the earthy scent of the forest filling my lungs. It was my third solo hiking trip, and I'd chosen this trail for its solitude and the promise of untamed wilderness. The Appalachian Trail stretched far beyond the horizon, weaving through ridges and valleys that seemed untouched by time. "All right, Sarah," I murmured to myself, pulling my flannel tighter against the crisp morning chill. Time to get moving. The plan was simple: set up camp early, gather firewood, and enjoy the peaceful isolation. I had no plans for heroics, no intention of wandering too far from my base. Just me, the trees, and the whispers of the forest. I glanced at the small clearing where my tent sat, its bright orange fabric a stark contrast against the greens and browns of the underbrush. My backpack leaned against a tree, a half-eaten granola bar perched precariously on top. Birds chirped. In the distance, their melodies a soothing backdrop to the rhythmic crunch of leaves under my boots as I walked toward the edge of the clearing. The forest beyond was a tapestry of light and shadow, with shafts of sunlight piercing through the dense canopy above. I picked up a few fallen branches, snapping them into smaller pieces to fit in my fire pit. The scent of pine resin and damp earth followed me as I ventured deeper into the woods, careful not to stray too far. I had read enough stories of hikers who wandered off trail and never returned. As I worked, the forest began to shift. The birds' chirping slowed, their songs replaced by a heavy silence that pressed against my ears. I paused, my hands full of branches, and glanced around. It wasn't unusual for the forest to fall silent, I reminded myself. Predators moved through these woods, and the wildlife knew to keep quiet when danger was near. But then I saw it. Deep gouges carved into the bark of an old oak tree, each one a jagged reminder of what roamed these woods. The marks were fresh, the exposed wood still pale and raw beneath the rough bark. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the claw marks, my mind racing. "Bear," I whispered, my voice barely audible. My first thought was to turn back, immediately. But my pile of firewood was pitiful, and I'd already trekked farther than intended. I told myself the marks could be days old, that the bear was likely miles away by now. Besides, I'd read the park guidelines. Make noise, keep a safe distance, and never run if you encounter one. "So you've got this," I said under my breath, forcing a confidence I didn't quite feel. I resumed gathering wood, each crackle of breaking branches echoing like a gunshot in the silence. Every step felt heavier, each sound amplified as if the forest itself was holding its breath. My instincts screamed at me to head back to camp, but I pushed on, rationalizing every decision. Just a little more wood, then I'd retreat to safety. A sudden snap of underbrush made me freeze. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello?" I called out, my voice quivering slightly. Nothing answered but the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. I clenched my fists, my knuckles whitening around the bundle of sticks in my arms. Maybe it was a deer or a squirrel. Maybe I was overreacting. But then came a low, guttural growl that rumbled through the air like distant thunder. My blood ran, cold as I turned toward the sound, my eyes scanning the shadows. It was there, maybe 30 yards away. A black bear stood at the edge of a thicket, its dark eyes locked onto me. It was massive, its sleek fur catching the dappled sunlight as it shifted slightly, its nose twitching as it caught my scent. My breath hitched, my pulse thundered in my ears. This was no chance sighting. The bear knew I was here, and I was too close. "Okay," I muttered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just stay calm." The bear's head tilted slightly, its small ears flicking forward as it watched me. I knew better than to turn and run. Every survival tip drilled into my head screamed at me to back away slowly, to speak softly and avoid eye contact. "Easy, big guy," I said, my voice trembling. I took a slow step back, then another. "I'm not here to bother you." The bear took a step forward and my heart plummeted. Its muscles rippled beneath its thick fur, each movement deliberate and powerful. It wasn't charging, not yet, but it wasn't retreating either. "Please, just go," I whispered, barely audible over the sound of my own breathing. My hands tightened around the branches I still held, my fingers trembling. For a moment, time seemed to stretch thin. the forest caught in a fragile, terrifying balance. I could feel the weight of the bear's gaze, its primal intelligence assessing me as a potential threat or prey. The silence was deafening, broken only by the bear's huffing breaths. Then it shifted, its front paw crunching against the underbrush as it took another step forward. My stomach churned, and I felt a surge of adrenaline spike through me. "No," I said sharply, louder this time. I raised my arms slowly, trying to make myself appear larger. "Stay back." The bear hesitated, its ears twitching at the sudden noise. I took another step back, my foot catching on a root, and I stumbled, dropping the firewood in a clattering heap. The bear's head snapped toward the noise, and its posture stiffened. I forced myself to stay still, my breaths shallow and rapid. "Please just go," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. The bear stared for another excruciating moment, then let out a sharp huff before turning and lumbering back into the thicket. I stayed frozen, my eyes locked on the spot where it disappeared, my legs trembling beneath me. When I finally found the strength to move, I grabbed my scattered firewood and hurried back to camp, glancing over my shoulder with every step. The safety of my small clearing felt miles away, the bear's presence lingering like a shadow. By the time I reached my tent, my hands were shaking so badly that I struggled to light the campfire. I sat beside the flames, their flickering light offering little comfort against the weight of what had just happened. The forest's whispers returned, but they carried a different tone now, a reminder that this land belonged to the wild, and I was only a visitor. The air seemed heavier as I sat by the fire, my mind replaying every moment of the bear's appearance. Each snap of the flames felt louder, each shadow cast by the flickering light sharper. Despite my attempt to focus on the calming warmth, I couldn't shake the tension coiling in my chest. "Get it together, Sarah," I muttered to myself, tossing another stick onto the fire. The forest was alive again with faint rustles and distant bird calls, but the memory of those dark, piercing eyes watching me wouldn't fade. Deciding that distraction was better than sitting in my own unease, I grabbed my headlamp and my battered notebook, a habit I developed on hikes to record thoughts and observations. The pages were filled with sketches of wildflowers and notes about trails I'd explored. Tonight, though, my hands trembled as I sketched the outline of a bear's paw, its claws extending like deadly scythes. The distant crunch of leaves snapped my attention back to the woods. My headlamp flicked to life as I scanned the tree line. Shadows danced wildly as the beams swept over bushes and branches. "Probably just a raccoon," I whispered, though my voice lacked conviction. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was out there. The forest grew silent again, the absence of sound more unnerving than the noise. I felt a sudden chill despite the fire's warmth. Grabbing the hatchet from my pack, I stood, the weight of the tool both comforting and terrifying in my grip. "Hello?" My voice was steady, but the word echoed strangely in the stillness. The only answer was the distant rustle of leaves swaying in the wind. I took a cautious step toward the edge of the clearing, my headlamp illuminating the underbrush. The light caught something, a glint, a brief flash, and I froze. Then came a low, guttural growl. The sound vibrated through me, primal and unmistakable. My grip on the hatchet tightened as I backed toward the fire, my pulse hammering in, my ears. "Stay calm," I whispered, barely audible over the pounding of my heart. The growl grew louder, deeper, and suddenly, the massive form of the black bear emerged from the shadows. Its eyes reflected the firelight, gleaming like dark pools of oil. My breath caught as it took a slow step forward, its powerful body swaying with deliberate intent. "Go away!" I shouted, waving the hatchet in the air. "I'm not a threat!" The bear stopped, its head tilting slightly as if considering my words. For a moment, I thought it might retreat, but then it dropped to all fours, its growl rumbling like distant thunder. I remembered the advice I'd read. Make yourself look bigger, stand your ground. My legs felt like lead, but I raised my arms, shouting louder. "Get back!" The bear's lips curled, revealing sharp yellow teeth. It took another step forward, and I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the fire pit. My headlamp's beam wavered, casting erratic shadows that only added to the chaos. "Why now?" I muttered, panic rising as the bear's growl deepened. "Why me?" I fumbled for the bear spray strapped to my belt, but my trembling hands made it difficult to unclip. The bear's massive paws crunched the dried leaves, each step deliberate and menacing. Finally, I freed the canister and pointed it toward the advancing bear. My thumb pressed hard on the trigger, releasing a fiery orange cloud into the air. The bear reared back, shaking its head and huffing loudly as the spray hit its face. "Go!" I shouted, my voice raw. The bear hesitated, its growl shifting to a sharp snort. Then, with a final shake of its head, it turned and loped back into the darkness, its heavy footsteps fading quickly. I stood there, panting, the canister still raised, as the forest seemed to release the breath it had been holding. My entire body trembled, the weight of what had just happened crashing down on me like a tidal wave. Dropping to my knees, I stared at the fire, its flames now seeming small and fragile against the vast, untamed wilderness around me. I had read about bear encounters, prepared for the possibility, but nothing could have prepared me for the sheer terror of those moments. The sound of approaching footsteps made me jolt upright, my heart racing all over again. I spun around, the hatchet back in my grip, but it was only another hiker, their headlamp bobbing as they entered the clearing. "Hey, is everything okay?" the man called out, his voice cautious but concerned. He looked to be in his late 30s with a rugged backpack slung over one shoulder and a walking stick in hand. I exhaled, lowering the hatchet. "Yeah," I said, my voice shaky. I'm fine. There was a bear. It came right into my camp." His eyes widened. "A bear? Are you hurt?" I shook my head. "No, it didn't attack. I used bear spray and it ran off. But it was close. Too close." He glanced around, his expression wary. "You should report this to the rangers. They need to know there's a bear this bold near the trail." "I will," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, his face softening. "You sure?" "You're okay. I can stick around if you want some company." I hesitated, the weight of the encounter pressing heavily on my chest. "Thanks," I said finally, forcing a weak smile. "But I think I just need some rest." He gave a small nod and began to turn away. "Take care," he said over his shoulder, "and don't hesitate to call for help if you need it." As his footsteps faded, I sat back down by the fire, the hatchet resting beside me. The forest felt larger, more imposing now, its secrets pressing in from every direction. I knew I wouldn't sleep much that night. The memory of the bear's eyes, calculating, powerful, primal, would stay with me. The forest was no longer just a place of peace and solitude. It was a place of raw, unfiltered reality. A place where nature's indifference could become a life-or-death encounter in an instant. The moment stretched, a fragile thread pulled taut between me and the bear. Every muscle in my body screamed to run, but instinct held me rooted in place, my breath coming in shallow bursts. The bear's growl grew louder, vibrating through the air like distant thunder. It lowered its head, its massive shoulders rolling forward as it shifted its weight. This wasn't a bluff. I was in its territory, and it was making that abundantly clear. "Stay back," I whispered, though my voice sounded small, almost absurd against the hulking form before me. My hands clenched the canister of bear spray, my thumb hovering over the trigger. The firelight flickered weakly, casting long, wavering shadows across the clearing. Then it charged. The ground seemed to shake as the bear's massive paws pounded the dirt. Its speed was shocking, the distance between us vanishing in an instant. Adrenaline surged, and I barely managed to raise the bear spray, a desperate scream ripping from my throat as I pressed the trigger. The bright orange cloud erupted from the nozzle, enveloping the bear's face. It skidded to a halt, shaking its massive head violently as the chemical mist clung to its fur and eyes. A deep, guttural roar tore through the air, reverberating in my chest like a drumbeat. "Go!" I shouted, backing away as fast as my legs would allow, nearly tripping over the uneven ground. The bear pawed at its face, huffing and snorting as it tried to clear the stinging irritant. For a moment, it seemed to hesitate, its dark eyes blinking, rapidly as it processed the sudden assault. Then it let out a furious bellow and surged forward again. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on a loose root, and I hit the ground hard. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and the bear's shadow loomed over me, blocking out the firelight. It was so close now that I could see the gleam of its wet nose, the powerful muscles rippling beneath its fur. "No!" I screamed, raising the canister again and spraying wildly. The acrid smell of the bear spray stung my own eyes and throat, but I didn't stop, emptying the last of the canister in a desperate arc. The bear reared back, its massive form momentarily illuminated by the flickering fire. It shook its head violently, a deep rumble of frustration echoing through the clearing. Then, with a final huff, it turned and lumbered away into the darkness, its heavy footsteps fading into the distance. I lay there for a moment, gasping for air, the empty canister still clutched in my trembling hand. My entire body shook, the adrenaline crash hitting me like a tidal wave. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the only sounds my ragged breathing, and the faint crackle of the dying fire. "Oh my God," I whispered, tears streaming down my face as the reality of what had just happened sank in. My hands fumbled for my phone, but when I turned it on, the screen mocked me with a single taunting word: no signal. I let out a shaky laugh, half hysterical, half relieved to still be alive. I forced myself to sit up, wincing as pain shot through my shoulder where I'd landed hard. My body ached, my heart still pounding like a war drum. The clearing felt impossibly vast now, every shadow a potential threat. The sound of snapping twigs made me freeze. My eyes darted to the tree line, my chest tightening. Had the bear come? Back! But the sound was lighter, more cautious. A moment later, a voice called out, "Hello, is someone there?" Relief flooded through me. "Yes, over here," I called, my voice hoarse and strained. A beam of light cut through the darkness as another hiker stepped into the clearing. He was tall, with a rugged backpack slung over one shoulder and a walking stick in hand. His face was lined with concern as he approached. "Are you okay?" he asked, kneeling beside me. "I heard shouting and... did something happen?" I nodded, my voice catching in my throat. "A bear. It charged me. I used bear spray, but it was so close." His eyes widened. "You're lucky it didn't..." He cut himself off, glancing at the empty canister in my hand. "You did the right thing. Where's your camp?" I gestured weakly toward the smoldering fire. "Here. I was gathering wood, and it came out of nowhere." He nodded, his expression grave. "Bears can be unpredictable, especially if they feel threatened. You're lucky you had the spray." He glanced around the clearing, his grip tightening on his walking stick. "It might come back. We should get you somewhere safer." I shook my head, the thought of moving making my stomach churn. I need a minute." "Okay," he said gently, "but we shouldn't stay too long. I'll keep watch while you catch your breath." I nodded, grateful for his presence even if it didn't fully dispel the fear gripping me. Together we sat in silence, the forest slowly coming back to life around us. The distant calls of night birds and the soft rustle of leaves felt almost surreal after the chaos of the past few minutes. Finally, I forced myself to stand, my legs shaky but functional. "Thank you," I said, my voice steadier now. "I don't think I could have..." He smiled faintly. "We're all just trying to survive out here. Come on, let's head to the ranger station. They need to know about the bear." As we packed up what little I'd unpacked, I glanced back toward the tree line where the bear had disappeared. My scars would be invisible for now, but I knew the memory would linger, etched into my mind like the claw marks on that tree. This wilderness was beautiful, but it was also unforgiving. And tonight I had been reminded just how small I truly was. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I tightened the straps on my pack. Every small noise in the forest made me flinch, a distant rustle of leaves, the sharp crack of a branch. Even the breeze brushing through the trees seemed to carry the bear's presence. I wanted to believe the encounter was over, but the wild still felt like it was watching. "Sarah," muttered to myself, gripping the edge of the fire pit for support. "You're fine, you're alive." The reassurance sounded hollow, even to me. My leg throbbed from where I'd scraped it in my frantic retreat, and my throat burned from the bear spray's lingering fumes. But I couldn't stay in the clearing any longer. The memory of the bear's massive form, its black fur glinting. In the firelight, its eyes full of raw power, kept my pulse racing. With the fire nearly extinguished, I poured the last of my water over the embers and shoved the empty bottle into my pack. I needed to get to the ranger station, to find safety and report what had happened. The map showed it was about 3 miles away. A short hike under normal circumstances, but now it felt like a marathon. I turned toward the trailhead, gripping my walking stick tightly. The narrow dirt path snaked through the trees, its edges lined with moss-covered rocks and clusters of ferns. The morning sunlight struggled to break through the dense canopy, casting everything in a dim greenish glow. Just keep moving, I told myself, each word a mantra to drown out the pounding of my heart. One step at a time. The forest was eerily quiet, as if every living thing had decided to hold its breath. I kept my head on a swivel, my ears straining for any sound that might signal danger. But aside from the occasional rustle of leaves, the trail remained silent. Half a mile in, I spotted fresh tracks in the dirt. The unmistakable outline of a bear's paw sent a chill down my spine. The tracks were large, their edges crisp, as if the bear had passed through not long ago. "Don't panic," I whispered, but my voice wavered. I scanned the trees, gripping the canister of bear spray in my left hand, though it was nearly empty. My walking stick felt like little more than a twig against something so powerful. I picked up the pace, my boots crunching against the gravel. The faster I moved, the louder the forest seemed to grow. Every branch that snapped, every gust of wind that rustled the leaves, it all sounded like the bear returning, ready to finish what it had started. Another mile in, my breath came in shallow gasps. My shoulders ached from the weight of my pack, and my legs felt like they were trudging through wet cement. The fear was an almost tangible thing, pressing down on me with every step. I kept glancing, behind me, expecting to see the bear's hulking form at any moment. Then I heard it, the heavy crunch of something large moving through the underbrush, too deliberate to be the wind. "No," I breathed, stopping dead in my tracks. The sound came again, closer this time. My mind raced, every survival tip I'd ever read flashing through my head. I needed to stay calm, to stand my ground and not make any sudden moves, but my body was already trembling, adrenaline surging through my veins. "Hey!" I called out, my voice cracking. "Go on. Get out of here." The underbrush parted, and my heart nearly stopped as a young black bear cub stumbled into view. It paused, its small round ears twitching as it looked at me with curious dark eyes. A mix of relief and dread washed over me. The cub was harmless, on its own, but where there was a cub, there was almost always a mother nearby. I took a slow step back, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Easy," I whispered, not taking my eyes off the cub. It sniffed the air, taking a few hesitant steps toward me before stopping. My fingers tightened around the canister of bear spray, and I scanned the trees, every nerve in my body screaming at me to move. The distant snap of a branch made me freeze. From the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of movement. A large, dark shape moving through the trees. The mother bear. She emerged from the shadows, her massive frame dwarfing the cub. Her eyes locked onto me instantly, and her growl rumbled through the forest like an earthquake. The cub let out a soft bleat and scurried back toward her, brushing against her leg. "Oh God," I muttered, my hands trembling. I raised the bear spray, my thumb hovering over the trigger. The mother bear huffed loudly, her head swaying, side to side as she sized me up. She took a step forward, her claws digging into the dirt, and my heart leapt into my throat. "I'm not a threat," I said, my voice shaky but firm. Just let me go." The bear's growl deepened, and she took another step closer. I felt the weight of her presence, the raw power radiating from her massive form. My legs felt rooted to the ground, every instinct screaming for me to run, but I knew that would be a death sentence. Okay, I whispered, slowly backing away. "I'm leaving." She didn't charge, but her growl followed me as I inched, backward step by agonizing step. The cub stayed close to her side, its small form a stark contrast to her immense bulk. My breath came in shallow gasps, my chest tight with fear. After what felt like an eternity, I reached a bend in the trail and slipped out of sight. Then did I turn and break into a run, my legs burning as I pushed myself forward. The ranger station was still a mile away, but I didn't dare slow down. The sound of my pounding footsteps mixed with the wild hammering of my heart. When I finally saw the small wooden building come into view, tears of relief blurred my vision. I stumbled through the door, collapsing onto a bench, my chest heaving. A ranger rushed over, his brow furrowed in concern. "What happened?" "Bear," I gasped, my voice raw. A mother and her cub. She didn't attack, but she was so close." The ranger nodded, grabbing a radio from the counter. "Tayo did the right thing staying calm. We'll send someone to check the area." As he spoke, another ranger handed me a bottle of water, and I took a shaky sip, the cool liquid soothing my parched throat. The terror of the encounter still clung to me, but for the first time in hours I felt a small measure of safety. The forest could keep its secrets, its shadows and dangers. I had survived, but I knew I'd never forget the weight of those eyes, the raw power of the wild that had come so close to claiming me. The ranger station's warmth wrapped around me like a protective cocoon, the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the faint tang of antiseptic. My body still trembled. As I sat on the wooden bench, clutching the water bottle a ranger had handed me, every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the murmur of voices, felt too loud, as if my senses hadn't fully adjusted to safety. "Let's take a look at that leg," a young female ranger said, kneeling in front of me. Her name tag read Megan, and her calm demeanor was a balm to my frayed nerves. She gestured to my torn jeans, her voice gentle but firm. "Can you pull this up a bit?" I nodded mutely, rolling up the fabric to reveal the angry scrape along my shin. Dried blood crusted around the edges, and the skin was mottled with swelling. Megan whistled softly. "It's not deep, but it's going to sting," she said, opening a first aid kit. She soaked a cotton pad in antiseptic and glanced up at me. "Ready?" "Yeah," I muttered, though my voice sounded distant, even to me. The sharp sting of the antiseptic snapped me out of my haze, and I hissed through my teeth, gripping the edge of the bench. Megan worked quickly, her hands deft as she cleaned the wound and applied a bandage. "There," she said, standing and giving me a reassuring smile. "You'll be sore for a while, but you're in good shape considering what you've been through." I nodded, still too shaken to respond properly. Another ranger, an older man with a grizzled beard, approached with a clipboard in hand. His name tag read Tom, and his sharp eyes seemed to take in every detail of my disheveled state. "Sarah, right?" he asked, his voice gravelly but kind. "Yeah," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "Mind if we ask you a few questions?" Tom continued, pulling up a chair beside me. "We need to document what happened for safety reasons." "Okay," I said, my hands tightening around the water bottle. Megan pulled up a chair as well, her presence a steady anchor. Tom flipped open his clipboard, pen poised. "Start." "From the beginning," he said. "Where were you when you first saw the bear?" I took a deep breath, forcing myself to relive the events. I was gathering firewood, just off the trail. It was late afternoon, and everything seemed normal at first. Then I saw claw marks on a tree, fresh ones. Tom nodded, jotting down notes. "Go on." "I didn't think much of it at first," I admitted, my voice trembling. But then I heard something. Branches snapping. When I turned around, the bear was there. It was maybe 30 yards away, just watching me. "Black bear?" Tom asked. "Yeah," I confirmed. "It was huge. I tried to back away slowly like you're supposed to, but it charged." Megan's brow furrowed. "Did it make contact?" "Almost," I said, my throat tightening at the memory. "I used the bear spray just in time. It stopped, but it didn't run off right away. It kept growling, circling. I thought it was going to finish me off." Tom tapped his pen against the clipboard, his face grim. "You're lucky to be alive. Most black bears avoid people, but if they're protecting cubs or feeling threatened, they can be unpredictable." I nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. It felt like forever before it finally left. I just grabbed my stuff and ran back to camp. Megan exchanged a glance with Tom. "Did you notice any food left out? Anything that might have attracted it?" she asked. "No," I said quickly. "I was careful. I stored everything properly, hung the food bag far from the tent. I didn't even cook that day." Tom sighed, scribbling another note. "Sometimes it doesn't take much. Could be the bears used to foraging around campsites. We'll need to post a warning for hikers in the area." "Should I have done something differently?" I asked, the guilt pressing down on me. "You did what you could," Tom assured me. You had bear spray, you stayed calm. It sounds like you handled the situation as well as anyone could. Sometimes it's just bad luck. I swallowed hard, nodding. The rational part of me knew he was right, but it didn't make the fear any less potent. What happens now? I asked after a moment, my voice quieter. We'll monitor the area, Tom said. Set up some cameras, see if the bear sticks around. If it's becoming a consistent problem, we may need to relocate it. Megan stood, giving my shoulder a gentle squeeze. You did the right thing by coming here. We'll take it from here. You just focus on recovering. Tom closed his clipboard, his gaze softening. Anything else you remember? Details can help. I shook my head. Just the way it looked at me, like it was deciding what to do. Tom nodded solemnly. That's the wild for you. It doesn't follow rules, just instincts. The weight of his words lingered as Megan handed me a map. This shows the safest routes back to the trailhead, she explained. And here's the emergency number, just in case. Thank you, I said, my voice steadier now. Megan smiled. You've been through a lot. Take it easy, okay? I nodded, slipping the map into my pack. As I stood, my legs felt weak, but the ranger's reassurance gave me the strength to move forward. The forest outside loomed, its shadows deep and endless, but I knew I couldn't let fear keep me from continuing my journey. Tom escorted me to the door, pausing before I stepped out. You're tougher than you think, Sarah, he said. Don't. Forget that. His words stayed with me as I stepped into the sunlight, the crisp air filling my lungs. The forest was still the same, but I wasn't. I'd faced the wild and come out alive, and though the fear lingered, so did a newfound respect for the untamed world I'd ventured into. One step at a time, I told myself as I started down the trail, the ranger station fading behind me. One step at a time. The hike back to the trailhead felt like walking through a nightmare. Every step seemed heavier, the ache in my legs and the sting in my bandaged shin, a constant reminder of how close I'd come to disaster. The sun hung low in the sky, its light filtering weakly through the dense canopy above. My eyes flicked to every shadow, every rustling bush, expecting the bear to reappear at any moment. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Okay, it's just your nerves, I told myself, my voice barely audible. You're fine. But the forest's silence offered no comfort. Even the birds seemed to have retreated, their usual chatter replaced by an oppressive quiet. My hands gripped the straps of my pack so tightly that my knuckles ached, and my heart jumped at every crackle of a branch beneath my boots. Finally, the faint outline of the trailhead parking lot came into view, and I exhaled a shaky breath. Relief flooded through me as I spotted the ranger's green SUV parked near the edge. A lone figure leaned against the vehicle, arms crossed, scanning the tree line. "Hey!" I called, waving a hand as I stumbled closer. The ranger turned, his face a mixture of relief and concern. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his uniform neatly pressed despite the rugged surroundings. His name tag read, Jake. "Sarah, right?" he asked, pushing off the SUV and walking toward me. I nodded, my breath coming in gasps. "Yeah, I made it." Jake's gaze swept over me, his sharp eyes taking in the dirt smudges on my face, the torn jeans and the bandage on my leg. "Looks like you've had quite the day," he said, his tone light but tinged with concern. I let out a weak laugh, my voice shaky. "You could say that." He gestured toward the SUV. "Come on, let's get you inside. We'll head to the main station and get you patched up properly." The warmth of the vehicle's interior was a welcome contrast to the chill that had settled into my bones. Jake handed me a bottle of water as he slid into the driver's seat, and I gulped it down, the cool liquid soothing my parched throat. "Tell me what happened," he said, his hands steady on the wheel as we began the bumpy drive down the narrow forest road. I recounted the encounter as best as I could, my voice faltering when I described the moment the bear charged. Jake listened intently, his brows furrowing as I spoke. When I finished, he nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You did everything right," he said. "Using the bear spray, standing your ground. That's textbook survival. Not everyone can keep their head in a situation like that." "It didn't feel like I kept my head," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I was terrified. "Fear's normal," Jake said. "It's what keeps us alive out here." The important thing is you didn't freeze or do anything reckless. That bear might have been testing you, but you held your ground. That's what matters." I nodded, his words offering a small measure of comfort. The main station came into view, a sturdy log building nestled among the trees. Jake pulled up beside the entrance and helped me out of the SUV. Inside, the warmth of the wood stove and the smell of coffee greeted us. A middle-aged woman with a kind face hurried over, her ranger uniform neatly pressed. "This is Linda," Jake said. "She'll help take a closer look at that leg." Linda guided me to a small medical room, her touch gentle as she unwrapped the makeshift bandage. "It's not too bad," she said, cleaning the wound with practiced efficiency. "You're lucky it wasn't worse." "That seems to be the consensus," I said with a faint smile, though my voice still trembled. Once Linda finished, she handed me a fresh bottle of water and some painkillers. "You'll be sore for a while, but you're in good shape. Jake said you'd had a bear encounter?" I nodded, recounting the story again as she listened, her brow furrowing in concern. When I finished, she patted my shoulder reassuringly. "You did well," she said. "We'll make sure to put out a bulletin to warn other hikers in the area. Sounds like that bear's getting too comfortable near humans." Jake reappeared in the doorway, his expression serious. "We'll also do some patrols to make sure it hasn't stuck around," he said. "In the meantime, we'll get you set up in one of the cabins for the night. No point in heading back out there today." I hesitated, the thought of staying in the forest again making my stomach churn. But the exhaustion weighing down my limbs and the lingering ache in my leg made the decision for me. "Thank you," I said quietly. The cabin was small but cozy, with a single bed, a small table, and a wood stove. Linda brought me a tray of food and Jake left a radio on the table just in case. "If you need anything, just call," he said. I nodded, murmuring my thanks as he left. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and for the first time in hours, I felt a semblance of safety. As I lay on the bed, the events of the day replayed in my mind, each moment as vivid as if it were happening again. The bear's growl, the sting of the spray, the weight of its gaze. It all lingered like a shadow, refusing to fade. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of dark forests and gleaming eyes. But when the morning light filtered through the cabin's small window, it brought a sense of renewal. I was alive, and that was enough for now. The sharp scent of antiseptic filled the small clinic as I eased myself onto the examination table. My leg throbbed beneath the makeshift bandage, the adrenaline that had carried me this far finally wearing off. A nurse with a kind smile and nimble hands entered, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the whirlwind of panic that still gripped me. "You must be Sarah," she said, glancing at her clipboard before setting it aside. "I'm Jenny. Let's take a look at that leg, shall we?" I nodded, wincing as she unwrapped the layers of gauze. The skin beneath was an angry red, swollen, and raw from where the bear's claws had raked me. Jenny let out a low whistle, her eyes narrowing as she assessed the wound. "You're lucky it didn't go deeper," she said, reaching for a bottle of saline. "This is going to sting." "Great," I muttered, gripping the edge of the table as the cool liquid washed over the wound. The pain was sharp and immediate, a fiery burn that made me suck in a breath through clenched teeth. "You did the right thing coming here," Jenny said, her voice soothing as she worked. "Infections from animal scratches can get nasty fast, especially in the wild." As she cleaned the wound, the door creaked open and a doctor stepped in. A man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and a no-nonsense air about him. His name tag read, Dr. Whitman. "Good afternoon, Sarah," he said, pulling on a pair of gloves. "I hear you've had quite the adventure." "That's one way to put it," I replied, my voice still shaky. Dr. Whitman examined my leg, his touch firm but careful. "The nurse is right. You're lucky. These scratches are superficial, but they'll need a few stitches to close properly." "How's your pain level?" "Manageable," I lied, not wanting to sound weak. He gave me a knowing look but didn't push. "We'll numb the area first. Jenny, could you prep the anesthetic?" The nurse nodded and returned with a small sighing. As the doctor administered the numbing agent, I felt a brief pinch followed by a spreading warmth that dulled the pain. The tension in my shoulders eased slightly. "While I'm stitching this up, why don't you walk me through what happened?" Dr. Whitman asked, his tone conversational as he worked. I recounted the events again, from the moment I spotted the claw marks to the bear's charge. Speaking the words aloud felt surreal, as though it had happened to someone else. "Bear encounters are rare," he said, threading the first stitch with practiced precision. "But when they do happen, it's usually because the bear feels threatened or is protecting its territory." "I wasn't doing anything," I said, frustration creeping into my voice. "I was just there." "Sometimes that's all it takes," he replied. "You did the right thing by using bear spray. It's effective, but encounters like that can still leave a mark, both physically and mentally." Jenny chimed in, her voice soft. "It's not uncommon to feel shaken after something like this. You're processing a traumatic event, and that takes time." "Tell me about it," I said, managing a weak smile. The stitching took longer than I expected, each pull of the needle tugging at my skin. Dr. Whitman worked methodically, his brow furrowed in concentration. When he finally tied off the last stitch, he leaned back and nodded in satisfaction. "All done," he said, removing his gloves. "You'll need to keep the area clean and dry. I'll prescribe antibiotics to prevent infection and painkillers, if you need them. We'll also schedule a follow-up in a week to check on the healing." Jenny bandaged the wound with care, securing the dressing with medical tape. "There, you're good to go," she said, stepping back. "Take it easy, okay? No strenuous activity for a while." I nodded, grateful for their help. Dr. Whitman handed me a prescription and patted my shoulder. "You're tougher than you think, Sarah. Don't let this scare you away from the outdoors." "I'll try," I said, though the thought of returning to the woods made my stomach twist. After settling the paperwork, I stepped outside, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the parking lot. Jake stood by the Ranger's SUV, his arms crossed as he waited for me. "Feeling better?" he asked, his tone warm but professional. "Yeah," I said, taking a deep breath of the cool mountain air. "Thanks for everything." He nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "This kind of thing sticks with you, but it doesn't have to define you. Give yourself time." "I will," I promised, the weight of the day finally starting to lift. As I climbed into the passenger seat, I felt a glimmer of hope. The scars on my leg would fade, but the lesson would remain, a reminder of the wild's power and my own resilience. For now, that was enough. The light from the cabin's window spilled onto the porch, a warm beacon in the fading twilight. I sat on the wooden steps, my freshly bandaged leg stretched out before me, a steaming mug of tea cradled in my hands. Despite the physical distance from the bear and the safety of the ranger station, the memories clung to me like cobwebs, each thread pulling at my mind. "I've got service now," I murmured, pulling my phone from my jacket pocket. The signal bar flickered weakly, but it was enough. I opened a hiking forum I'd frequented for years and began typing, my fingers trembling slightly as I recounted the encounter. "Saw my first bear today, black bear, probably 300 pounds, it charged. I used bear spray and made it out. But it was the scariest moment of my life." The words felt hollow, barely scratching the surface of what I'd been through. I hesitated before hitting post, then set the phone down beside me and exhaled a shaky breath. The door creaked open and Jake stepped out, his boots thudding softly against the wooden planks. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, holding a mug of his own. "Go ahead," I said, shifting to make room. He lowered himself onto the step beside me, the silence between us comfortable but heavy with unspoken words. "Posting about it?" he asked, nodding toward my phone. "Yeah," I admitted. Felt like I needed to get it out. Maybe it'll help someone else avoid the same situation. Jake sipped his coffee, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the forest dissolved into shadow. "It's good to share," he said after a moment. "People need to hear these stories, keeps them aware, grounded." "But will they believe me?" I asked, my voice tinged with doubt. "It feels like something out of a movie. A bear charging at you, the spray, the noise it made. How do you put that into words?" "You'd be surprised," Jake said. "Plenty of people have had close calls with wildlife. It's part of being out here, part of respecting the wild. You tell your story, and it becomes part of a bigger one." The thought was both comforting and unsettling. I wasn't alone in this, but I'd also joined a group of people whose lives had been marked by moments of raw, untamed nature. My phone buzzed with a notification, and I glanced at the screen. Replies to my post were already trickling in. "Glad you're okay. Bear spray is a lifesaver. I had a similar encounter last year. Scary stuff. Take it easy for a while. Respect. For sharing. It's a reminder we're guests in their home. I showed Jake the messages and he smiled. See? People get it. And now they're learning from your experience. I nodded, a small sense of validation settling over me. It's weird, though. Even with all the support, it feels like I'll never shake it off. The way the bear looked at me, like it was deciding what I was worth. Jake's expression grew serious. That's something you won't forget, and you shouldn't. It's a reminder of the balance out here, the thin line between safety and danger, but don't let it stop you from living. We sat in silence for a while, the night deepening around us. The chirping of crickets filled the air, a soothing rhythm that contrasted sharply with the memory of the bear's growl. The door opened again and Linda appeared, a small flashlight in her hand. "You two doing okay out here?" she asked, her smile warm. "We're good," Jake said, lifting his mug. Linda nodded, stepping closer. "Sarah, I've seen a lot of hikers come through here with their own bear stories. You're handling this better than most. It'll take time, but you're stronger than you think." Her words struck a chord, and I felt a lump rise in my throat. "Thanks," I said, my voice thick. She patted my shoulder before heading back inside, leaving me alone with Jake and the steady hum of the night. "So, what's next?" he asked after a while. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe I'll take a break from solo hikes for a bit, stick to safer trails at least, until I feel ready again." "That's fair," he said. "No shame in knowing your limits, but don't let fear keep you from what you love. The wilderness has its risks, but it also has its rewards." I let his words sink in, the weight of the day slowly lifting. The forest, for all its danger, still called to me. It wasn't just a place of fear. It was a place of beauty, of connection, of life. And I wasn't ready to give that up. The first stars began to peek through the darkening sky, their light soft and steady. I took a deep breath, the cool air filling my lungs. "One step at a time," I said softly, echoing the mantra that had carried me through the day. Jake nodded, his gaze never leaving the horizon. "Exactly." The morning light seeped through the cabin's window, painting the wooden walls with soft golden hues. I stirred from a restless sleep, the weight of the previous day pressing heavily on my chest. Even as I stretched and tested the stiffness in my leg, the bear's shadow lingered in my mind. I made my way to the small kitchen where the aroma of freshly brewed coffee greeted me. Jake was already there, leaning casually against the counter, with a mug in hand. His ranger uniform looked as crisp as ever, despite the long hours he must have worked. "Morning," he said, nodding toward the coffee pot. "Help yourself." "Thanks," I murmured, pouring myself a cup. The warmth of the mug was a small comfort, grounding me as I sat at the kitchen table. Jake joined me, his sharp eyes studying me without judgment. "How'd you sleep?" he asked. I shrugged. "Not great. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the bear. That moment when it charged, I can't stop replaying it." Jake nodded, his expression somber. "That's normal. Your mind's trying to process what happened. It's a survival mechanism, reliving the danger so you can learn from it." "Feels more like torture," I muttered, tracing the rim of my mug with a finger. "Give it time," he said. "It'll fade, but it'll never fully go away. And that's not a bad thing. Fear keeps us sharp, reminds us to respect the wilderness." I sipped my coffee, the bitter taste grounding me. "I've always loved the outdoors," I said quietly. "But now it feels different, like it's not mine anymore." "It never was," Jake replied. "The wilderness belongs to itself. We're just visitors. And like any good guest, we need to understand the house rules." I managed a faint smile. "Guess I got a harsh lesson in to that." "You did," he said, leaning back in his chair. "But you're here and you're talking about it. That's a step forward." We sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the waking forest filtering through the open window. Birds chirped, and the gentle rustle of leaves was a soothing backdrop. "Do you ever—" I began, hesitating. "Do you ever feel scared out there, even with all your experience?" Jake's eyes grew distant, his face thoughtful. "Every time," he said. "I've had my share of close calls." A Moose that decided I was too close. A mountain lion I didn't see until it was nearly on top of me. Fear keeps me careful. It's not about eliminating it, it's about respecting it. His words settled over me like a blanket, comforting in their honesty. I'd always thought of fear as something to conquer, but perhaps it was something to carry, to coexist with. After breakfast, I ventured outside, my walking stick in hand. The cabin's porch creaked beneath my weight as I leaned on the railing, gazing out at the forest. The trees stood tall and unwavering,